What if America split? During the Civil Rights era. It's June 1963. President Kennedy has just delivered his Civil Rights Address, calling for sweeping desegregation and federal intervention across the South. But in this timeline, the backlash is immediate and far more coordinated. Alabama Governor George Wallace, backed by a coalition of Southern governors, declares open defiance, not just of integration, but of federal authority itself. Militia groups mobilize. White citizens' councils begin blockading highways. Mississippi, Alabama, and Georgia pass emergency legislation to assert regional sovereignty. And when Kennedy threatens to send in federal troops, a dozen state legislatures convene to draft a resolution. Secession, not submission. By late summer 1963, 5 southern states, Alabama, Mississippi, Georgia, South Carolina, and Louisiana, form the Coalition of Sovereign States, CSS. They claim they are not seceding, merely reclaiming constitutional autonomy. Armed checkpoints appear at state borders. National Guard units are retasked under local command. Wallace and other governors appear on TV wearing suits and Confederate pins, denouncing Northern tyranny and Negro radicalism. The Stars and Stripes is lowered in favor of newly designed sovereignty flags. Washington is caught off guard, too slow to act, too divided to agree. America, for the first time since 1861, is on the verge of internal war. Civil rights leaders like Martin Luther King Jr., Bayard Rustin, and Fannie Lou Hamer shift into emergency strategy mode. Nonviolence remains their mantra, but with entire states turning hostile, survival becomes urgent. Community defense groups quietly begin forming in northern cities and black-majority southern towns. Militants from the north offer support, some from Malcolm X's circles, others from anti-colonial student groups. Churches transform into command centers for protest coordination and safe housing. Corps and SNCC volunteers begin ferrying families out of CSS territory under cover of night. A whisper spreads in the movement. Selma is behind enemy lines now. In Washington, JFK faces an impossible choice. Launching military action against the breakaway states risks reigniting civil war, but doing nothing emboldens defiance. His advisors are split. Bobby urges a hard line. McNamara advises caution. Meanwhile, protests erupt outside the White House from both sides. Northern liberals demand immediate action. Southern sympathizers call for federal restraint. Behind closed doors, the Joint Chiefs present Operation Gray Lantern, a full-scale mobilization plan for Southern reoccupation. Kennedy delays, hoping for a diplomatic out, but the clock is ticking, and his image of calm rationality is cracking under the weight of history. As the nation fractures, so does its information. Southern broadcasters refuse to carry federal news bulletins, claiming media subversion. Walter Cronkite is labeled a traitor by Dixie Networks. Propaganda outlets emerge across the CSS, spinning tales of freedom uprisings and Northern oppression. In the North, black newspapers and college radio stations fill the truth vacuum, reporting on purges, curfews, and racial terror in breakaway states. The American public now lives in 2 media realities, neither trusting the other. Truth in this America is regional. By 1964, millions of black Americans begin leaving the CSS in a second wave of mass displacement. Trains, buses, and convoys snake northward under National Guard protection. Entire communities empty overnight, businesses shuttered, homes abandoned. Northern cities like Chicago, Detroit, and Philadelphia absorb the migrants but strain under housing shortages and racial tension. Federal funds are poured into emergency housing and resettlement programs, creating what are dubbed freedom corridors. Meanwhile, CSS states crack down harder, passing laws stripping fleeing citizens of land, pensions, and voting rights. The South becomes a political graveyard. But in northern churches and kitchens, stories of resistance begin to shape a new national identity. In early 1965, CSS states begin construction of a fortified border stretching from the Atlantic to the Mississippi River. Guard towers, Electrified fences and checkpoint zones divide former interstate highways. CSS leaders call it the line of preservation. Washington condemns it as a human rights atrocity. Satellite images reveal detention camps springing up near the border, allegedly to hold subversives and northern infiltrators. Journalists are barred entry. Families separated by the wall send messages by radio and letters smuggled through truckers. The American dream now has a concrete scar running across it. By mid-1965, JFK can wait no longer. Following the violent death of civil rights workers near the CSS border and mounting global pressure, Kennedy invokes emergency wartime powers. Operation Union Flame begins. A federal blockade of CSS ports, cyber disruptions of southern infrastructure, and the deployment of thousands of troops to the northern edge of the wall. The operation stops short of invasion, but it signals intent. Europe cautiously supports Washington. The USSR denounces both sides. The South cries tyranny, staging mass rallies as northern media broadcasts images of children dying in understaffed CSS hospitals. Kennedy's approval rating soars in the north and tanks in the south. The United States of America is now the name of only half a country. In the fractured states of the CSS, religion becomes a political weapon. Southern evangelical churches declare allegiance to the new order, preaching a gospel of racial hierarchy and divine sovereignty. Megapastors emerge as governors' mouthpieces, blending scripture with state propaganda. In the North, however, Black liberation theology surges. Ministers like James Cone and Coretta Scott King lead sermons linking Exodus to Selma, galvanizing protest and unity. Catholic bishops, Jewish leaders, and Muslim imams form rare alliances to denounce the Southern regime. Sunday services become resistance training. Churches split, burn, rebuild, and radicalize. Faith no longer bridges America, it sharpens the divide. Textbooks in CSS schools are rewritten, slavery described as a labor tradition, the Civil War as the first sovereignty movement. Black history is banned outright. Northern educators fight back, forming the National Education Corps, which sends thousands of teachers into refugee zones and underserved cities. Underground schools form in CSS territory, teaching resistance, real history, and banned literature. Maya Angelou's poetry is passed hand to hand. FBI-backed programs secretly supply books across the wall, packaged inside aid crates. Students in the CSS recite pledges to a restored order, while children in the North learn to never forget what was lost. The next generation grows up with two truths, two countries, and one fading hope for reunification. By 1968, the United States is no longer two political entities, it's two entirely different nations. The Democratic Convention in Chicago descends into chaos, not just from Vietnam protests, but from CSS provocateurs triggering riots. Martin Luther King Jr. narrowly survives an assassination attempt, galvanizing global support for his leadership. Meanwhile, the CSS elects its first official president in a staged referendum, an ex-governor turned nationalist demagogue. On the world stage, the Cold War takes a backseat to the American fracture. The UN passes a non-binding resolution condemning human rights abuses in the CSS, while Moscow begins funding pro-CSS media through shell organizations. The US flag is removed from some embassies and replaced with two separate banners, North and South. The year that defined revolution in the real world becomes the year of irreversible separation in this one. As the North reorients, Black Americans begin to enter the highest levels of federal power. Shirley Chisholm becomes the first Black vice president under a unity coalition in 1972. Civil rights veterans hold Senate seats, cabinet posts, and judgeships. Reparations are openly debated. The North launches the Truth and Reconstruction Commission, documenting CSS abuses and restoring seized Black lands in the border states. In CSS propaganda, these developments are painted as racial tyranny, used to stoke fear among white Southerners. But in reality, the Northern government begins to resemble the multiracial democracy the civil rights movement dreamed of. Progress isn't smooth, but it's unmistakable. By the mid-1970s, the CSS economy begins to collapse under its own isolation. Sanctions bite. International investment dries up. Its reliance on fossil fuels, cheap prison labor, and nostalgic tourism proves unsustainable. Citizens flee northward through an expanding underground network. Hospitals shut. Crops fail. In desperation, the CSS begins printing propaganda money called Dixie dollars and trading with rogue states. Smuggling becomes a way of life. The once defiant Confederacy 2.0 becomes a scarred, silent ruin, propped up only by its myths. In 1980, after nearly 2 decades of separation, a wave of reformers rises within the CSS, young, angry, and disillusioned. Secret negotiations begin. The North, now governed by a progressive coalition, demands truth commissions, war crime tribunals, and full racial equality before any reintegration. The CSS finally collapses, not with gunfire, but with a televised surrender by its final president. State by state, the South re-enters under a new federal framework. Statues fall. School curriculums are rewritten again, this time with names like Parks, Douglas, and Du Bois restored. But wounds remain. The reunified United States doesn't celebrate, it exhales. Reunification doesn't bring closure, it brings debate. Museums argue over how to tell the story. Former CSS leaders write memoirs filled with denial. Survivors of border camps publish harrowing testimonies. Northern conservatives begin calling for reconciliation without guilt. A generational divide opens. Those who lived through the split want justice, while the young simply want peace. College students stage protests demanding CSS archives be opened. In the South, murals painted over now reappear in whispers. The truth may have won, but memory, as always, remains contested. By the 1990s, America exists again. But it's different, more cautious, more self-aware. Every July 4th includes a reading not just of the Declaration of Independence, but of the Civil Rights Bill. A national holiday marks the day the South surrendered. And in classrooms across the country, children learn about the time their nation split. Not because of territory, but because of race. Some still call it the Second Civil War. Others call it the Reckoning. But everyone agrees on one thing. The miracle isn't that America endured, it's that it had to break to survive. Like and subscribe for more from History Twist. Leave a comment below to request your own What If video. See you soon for the next video.